This story is about a woman whose life is filled with lies from beginning to end. You will learn how the unscrupulous deceiver ends up in pursuit of big money and how many human destinies it can affect. Michelle grew up in the town of Hearst in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. The girl's mother left home in search of a better life, so the upbringing of children was the father. It was not easy for a man to raise two daughters alone. He survived on occasional earnings at a construction site and often relied on alcohol. In search of easy money, he repeatedly thought up and implemented devious plans for profit. He would take a job at one factory or another and deliberately injure himself in order to obtain insurance money compensation. The fraud scheme worked, but not for long. With the help of CCTV cameras at one of the workplaces, the scheme was uncovered and Michelle and Laura's father was sent into custody. Michelle grew up in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation from childhood. This was her normal life from which she wanted to escape by any means possible. But it is impossible to escape from herself because lies have already become a part of her life, and she simply did not know how to live differently. The girl dreams of growing up faster to get out of the hated poverty. At the age of 15, Michelle looks very spectacular, a petite brunette of athletic build. She attracts a lot of interest from guys both of her own and older age. Even then, Michelle realizes that with the help of her feminine power and charm, she can easily manage to manipulate any men in her environment in order to get what she wants. So in her life begins a series of love relationships with different men. At the age of 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries for the first time to 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien. She informs the boyfriend that she is expecting a baby. Kenneth, taking full responsibility for his young wife and future child, enlists in the army. The couple moves frequently. 2 more children are born to them in this marriage. One city is replaced by another. Temporary housing of the military was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. Such a life does not suit her, and after 5 years, she leaves, naming the reason for divorce beatings and cheating on the part of her husband. Michelle returns to her native Hearst. In front of relatives and friends, she appears as a victim of domestic violence and receives the necessary support and begins to organize her life anew. After a while, she falls in love with her former classmate, Brandon. The young man is head over heels in love with Michelle and gladly accepted her 3 children. The lovers prepare for the wedding. However, on the eve of the wedding, Michelle infuriates Brandon. It turns out that the girl did not divorce her first husband. She was very afraid to talk to him about divorce because of the abuse, so she did not send the documents. With the help of a lawyer, this issue was quickly settled and the couple was able to marry in 1994. At first, family life flowed calmly and measured. Brandon was engaged in the development of his IT company, and Michelle worked as a dental assistant. A quiet family life was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. She has always needed more. She starts bringing home all sorts of dental equipment and supplies. The cash doesn't fit in her purse. Brandon suspected something wrong. Eventually, Michelle was caught stealing. It was only by luck that a trial was avoided. But Brandon's trust issues with his wife were just beginning. Responding to neighbors' reports that cars were frequently arriving at the house while he was at work, Brandon installed a tape recorder in several rooms of the house. Listening to the tape, he heard various men visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon does his own little investigation and learns that the reason for the divorce in Michelle's first marriage was her numerous infidelities, not her husband's beatings, as she told everyone. Brandon's patience broke, and he demanded a divorce. Michelle was furious that Brandon initiated the divorce, and while he was at work, she got back at him. "I had a very nice saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish in it," Brandon says. "She poured Comet into it and killed all the fish." But Michelle didn't stop there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle stuffed the dog with sleeping pills, which led to the death of the living creature. Michelle put Domino to sleep. "If you're shocked at this point, we've only scratched the surface," Brandon says. "It was a nightmare that wouldn't stop. You can't make that girl go away." Unfortunately, Brandon learned the truth about Michelle when his own marriage was completely destroyed. Everything Michelle did with Brandon Dixon pales in comparison to her adventures with other men. It was later revealed that John Paul Ray, also a student at the high school Michelle attended in Hearst, was the father of her first child. Instead of revealing this information to John, she told Kenneth O'Brien that the child was his, forcing him to marry her. Kenneth, for 13 years, thought the eldest son was his own. John later told police that Kenneth paid child support from age 5 to 18 and did not know he was not the father. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived in a common-law marriage for 8 years. Their relationship came to an abrupt end when John began to suspect his wife of cheating. Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair on the side. John moved out, leaving most of Michelle's possessions. Michelle's next love was Greg Williams. They were both not so young anymore. Both had a history of past marital failures. The man was married twice and had a daughter. After Greg and Katie divorced in February 2003, the couple agreed to share custody of their common daughter, Taylor. However, there was no formal agreement on child support because the former spouses had a good relationship. Rich, successful, and generous Greg was a perfect match for Michelle. In February 2007, Greg and Michelle had a common daughter, Michaela. A year later, they got married. Their marriage was like the American dream. Money, children, love, it was all in abundance. Michelle seemed to have made it through the thorns to the stars and got the life she had always dreamed of. Greg Williams held his family in very high esteem. He grew up in a family with fierce principles and achieved everything on his own from an early age. He loved sports and was a martial arts black belt. In addition to his love of exercise, Greg was also a fan of guns. Both he and Michelle had guns that they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle's gun, a silver .40 caliber pistol, was kept in a safe, but Greg kept his gun, a black Lebert .45 caliber, always loaded in a case under his bedside table. The couple was determined to make their marriage a success. They threw birthday parties for their children from other marriages at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children would have barbecues and swim parties. Very often, the house was full of friends. But despite the picturesque suburban home and a precocious daughter, Greg and Michelle were not the classic American couple. They met through an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their wild adult house parties led to numerous complaints from neighbors. Without making the matter public, the couple decides to move out. The night before Michelle and Greg had been unable to sleep for a long time, they were preparing to buy a new house for $4,500,000. They emotionally discussed the upcoming event. Greg stayed in the bedroom alone. Michelle went out to her crying daughter and fell asleep with her in the room. On October 13, 2011 at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call came in. A crying woman screamed into the phone that she and her husband had been attacked by a robber. She was injured and her husband had been shot. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Inside the home, detectives found a television on full volume and a baby sleeping on the couch. Michelle's daughter was sound asleep and unaffected in any way by the attack that occurred. The woman's behavior alerted police officers. She was behaving rather strangely and did not look like she had just experienced a burglary. Soon, the gated community was filled with police cars, detectives, and forensic experts. The lot was cordoned off, and police searched every inch of the nearly 5,000 square foot home. Michelle was fully dressed, had her hair styled, and was acting very calm. She told police she was asleep, but her clothing and demeanor said otherwise. As the only witness, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for questioning. After several hours of talking to police and investigators, Michelle's story began to fall apart like a house of cards. According to the woman, the intruder dressed in all black hit her on the head with a wrench. She fell from the blow but was conscious and heard a gunshot. The stranger then fled through the back door of the house. Michelle Williams' account did not match what police saw at the scene. Greg Williams was shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun, presumably used by the intruder, was found near the back door next to a wrench. There were no fingerprints on either weapon. Neither was found to show any signs of forced entry. The family's valuables and money were untouched. Examined CCTV footage from a neighbor's camera showed that only one car had entered the gated community in the hours before the crime. Police confirmed that the car belonged to a newspaper delivery man. To confuse the investigation, Michelle came up with a version of the attack. She hit herself with a wrench and made their large house look like the scene of the attack. But detectives did their due diligence and noticed a number of details that didn't add up. Michelle Williams was fully dressed. Her hair was styled, and she had fresh makeup on her face. It gave the impression as if she was waiting for someone. The gun used during the crime was found in the house without any fingerprints, and the final detail that proved Michelle's lie was the $20,000 in cash that was not stolen in the robbery. Michelle had no explanation for why a successful businessman and devoted father decided to take his own life, but she was able to explain her behavior. Michelle claimed she wanted to spare their young daughter the bitter truth about her father's self-inflicted death. She admitted to police that she wiped down the gun and washed Greg's hands to cover up fingerprints before desperately staging a home invasion and calling emergency services. As bizarre as that explanation was, it became obvious to police why no evidence was found in the house. Michelle admitted to wiping the crime scene with bleach and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to present a more realistic picture of the attack. From the beginning, Keller police doubted the credibility of Michelle's testimony. But at the time, no physical evidence was presented linking her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was soon released home. Around 5 p.m. on the evening of her husband's murder, Michelle went to her sister Laura's home and did not mention the late Greg's name once during the evening. Michelle cried from time to time, but it didn't seem sincere, her sister Laura Cusick said when questioned by police. The morning after the tragedy, Michelle woke up in a great mood. She was beautifully dressed with her hair styled and makeup on. In high spirits, the recent widow went for breakfast at a famous restaurant that served the best pancakes with syrup. While the police were looking into the theory that Greg had taken his own life, struggling to find a motive and obtain credible evidence of it, Michelle herself presented the investigation with first a motive and then evidence of her guilt. Going through the documents from the first interrogation, the investigators were attracted by Michelle's words that she didn't care about a single penny, but her actions proved otherwise. After Greg's death, Michelle quickly begins liquidating assets from family companies and spending large sums of money. She cashes checks through Greg's IT company. The amount of checks cashed is not disclosed anywhere. In all likelihood, we are talking about a lot of money. After receiving cash from the sale of the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made one of her biggest blunders. She went to the insurance company hoping to get a payout on Greg's life insurance policy. Michelle was the sole beneficiary on Greg's life insurance policy, which was taken out on August 12, 2011, almost exactly 2 months before he was killed. But one important fact the woman missed: according to the terms of the insurance policy, Greg's death was not an insured event because he left his life voluntarily, and at the last moment, she was denied the money. The desire to get the insured sum of $600 was the main motive for the crime. Later, another important fact of financial fraud comes to light that casts suspicion on the widow. Fictitious financial documents for a mortgage loan were used to purchase the house that Greg and Michelle had been preparing for on the eve of his death. The account numbers were intentionally changed, and the lender did not immediately notice the elaborate fraud. When Greg died, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account was not discussed until it caught the attention of the police. Michelle, confident of her impunity, writes a check for $18,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn and takes a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During the 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police were able to unravel his wife's web of deceit. An autopsy was performed on Greg, which proves that the man was shot from a range of 12 to 18 inches. Moreover, the toxicology examination conducted provided a report proving that Greg had a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Also, the police determined that there was no assault on the house. Mrs. Williams sedated her husband and shot him from a foot away after turning up the volume on the television. Daughter Michelle, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, Based on the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, Greg Williams's death was officially ruled a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th as she was on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. Michelle was both the only witness to the crime and the only suspect. Bail was set at $522,000 to be released from custody pending a court hearing, but Michelle spent a week in custody and was released on $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, Michelle walked out of jail with a GPS monitor and under the arm of attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who was now officially representing her. Greg's first wife, Kathy, was furious when she found out that attorney Windhorn was defending Michelle. That money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it should never have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman who was accused of killing him. Online court records list Kenneth Windhorn as the attorney for Katie and Greg's divorce in February 2003, and Windhorn's name and signature appear on legal documents regarding the custody agreement for their shared daughter, Taylor, in February 2008. However, Kenneth Wincorn's defense of collusion with Michelle Williams will be exonerated by providing evidence. The divorce was handled by his company, and he personally never represented Greg. Kenneth Wincorn said he first learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. It was very shocking, Wincorn says, adding that Michelle later sought his help. After her plot to cash in on Greg's death is foiled, Michelle Williams changes her name to Shelley and appears as a fitness guru hoping to start a new life. On Facebook, Shelley publicly announced her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and heavily promoted it online. Armed with an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracker, Michelle spent the next few months enjoying her new boyfriend, fitness classes, and court hearings. She often appeared in court dressed for a night out on the town wearing miniskirts, knee-length boots, and deep-cut blouses. She never mourned Greg's death for a second, says Greg's ex-wife, Kathy. Rob Conover was friends with Greg Williams for more than 20 years and attended many of Michelle's hearings. He recalls how she deftly manipulated police officers at the courthouse, making them see her as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle Williams took a plea deal with the county and pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. She will receive 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and for deadly dangerous conduct, a third-degree felony that only exists in a few states. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. Things can go differently. Play big, win big, or lose big, Michelle said in an interview. With the plea bargain, I expect to do a couple years. And after that, I'll be out on parole. But in February 2014, Michelle Williams, in an interview, suddenly changes her testimony and says she is not guilty of the crime. The judge immediately rescinds the plea bargain and sets a date for the first trial. Opening arguments have begun in the trial of a Texas woman, dubbed by the media as Keller's Black Widow, who was accused of intentionally targeting her husband in 2011 for an insurance payoff. Michelle Williams, 45, was charged with the crime. In court, prosecutors described the crime as a clearly planned scheme of acts to profit from Greg's substantial life insurance policy. In their opening statement, prosecutors told jurors that Mrs. Williams shot her husband in the head after drugging him with sleeping pills beforehand in order to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money, time-tested money, greed, Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland said in court. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. In response to an interview request, Michelle's attorney released a statement on her behalf. Attorney Kenneth Wincorn described the difficulties in the case caused by the spotlessly clean crime scene. The prosecution struggled to prove a premeditated crime, disregarding the fact that there was no DNA from the suspect. In repeated searches, cleaning products were found, but it stands to reason that Michelle's fingerprints were on them since the products were in the house where she lived and did the cleaning. If the jury concludes that Michelle tampered with evidence of Greg's death, making it look like the man had spontaneously passed away, and then cleaned up the crime scene by hiding evidence and then lying about it, she will get a life sentence. But if Michelle is sentenced as scheduled on April 21st, no jury will ever get a chance to hear the whole story and decide on the appropriate punishment. Through careful questioning of the Williams couple's friends and acquaintances, information regularly emerged about the unfavorable environment that had prevailed in their family for a long period of time. According to the studied correspondence in social networks and messengers, it was found that the couple quarreled very often, and the reason was finances. At the trial, prosecutors said that in the hours leading up to the violent death, Greg Williams argued with his wife over their finances and even slapped her for spending a large amount of money that had been set aside as a down payment on a house. But Michelle Williams' defense argued that Greg Williams had taken his own life and that the successful business owner needed his wife alive, not dead. According to defense attorney Clay Graham, Greg Williams often suffered from depression and regularly used sedatives and steroids. On the eve of the crime, he was allegedly severely depressed due to the loss of his grandmother and best friend, who ironically had taken his own life. Defense counsel told the court that when Michelle Williams found her husband dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, she panicked and in a fit of fear began to cover up the tragedy without realizing it. She had one goal: to protect her 4-year-old daughter from psychological trauma by hiding the truth from her. Michelle Williams never once changed herself, presenting at court hearings in different images with styled hair and manicure. At one hearing, the defendant, dressed in an off-white blouse and black vest, showed little emotion throughout most of the trial, but did not forget to wipe away tears during a presentation of photographs showing images of the body of murdered Greg Williams. The court also heard testimony from Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, who said his mother Michelle Williams asked him to help frame Greg Williams' ex-wife, Kathy. She planned to blame her for Greg's death using the motive of unreconciled differences over the custody of their daughter, Taylor. But that plan was a failure from the get-go. After all, there was never any disagreement between the former spouses about the custody of their daughter, and it would have been very difficult to prove otherwise. Asked about his reaction to his mother's unusual request, 26-year-old Andrew O'Brien said he was very shocked by such a proposal and thought she was having a mental breakdown. Michelle confronted her sons at the trial when they testified against her. The jury later found Michelle guilty of felony tampering with physical evidence. According to the show, she provided false information that she was pregnant with twins, hoping to delay her sentencing. But this version was not confirmed, and the verdict was announced. Michelle's acting abilities and her natural charm, which she tried her best to demonstrate during each hearing, did not spare her from a harsh sentence. Sandwiched between a scenario in which she was a cold-blooded criminal and one in which she was portrayed as a deranged wife and mother acting on impulse, Michelle chose the latter. "He did it," she said, wrapping her arms around her head. Michelle even congratulated the detective on solving the case. "I wouldn't have gotten through the day," she said. "You've won." Even before the police admitted to doubting Michelle's story, few believed Greg had lost his life. He had too much to live for, and he knew all too well how much pain and untimely death causes. Kathy Williams believes that Michelle's relationship with Gene Wallace began when Greg was still alive and may be the elusive motive for this crime. If Greg had found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have dumped her, and she would have gotten nothing. Katie says Greg was willing to put up with a lot, but he wasn't willing to put up with cheating. "She's ruined so many lives you can't even imagine," Brandon says. "She's a professional manipulator." If the courts had gone further and interviewed all of us, things could have gone in a different direction. Michelle was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The judge also ruled that she would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Michelle currently remains incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Michelle Williams is a felon and fraudster who is currently serving time in prison for all of her willful acts. She has never shown remorse for her actions and still refuses to take full responsibility for her crime. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. During the London Olympics, a young Puerto Rican boxer, Felix Verdejo Sanchez, emerged as a shining star. Heralded as a diamond, he was seen as one of the most promising athletes from his country, with predictions of future titles and gold medals. Everyone believed that this talented and driven young man would reach incredible heights in the world of sports. In 2021, Felix Verdejo's name resurfaced in the global media, but this time it was in the crime section. The story revolves around a teenage romance that grew into an obsession, ultimately leading to a horrific tragedy. This tale also highlights how the 2014 Knockout of the Year recipient, praised and promoted by two-time Olympic champion Vasyl Lomachenko, narrowly avoided a death sentence and was sentenced to life imprisonment instead. Despite overwhelming evidence in his accomplice's confession, Verdejo continues to deny any guilt. Born on May 19, 1993 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Felix grew up in a modest, large family and had a passion for sports from an early age. Initially, he planned to pursue a career in baseball, but a pivotal incident changed his path. At 9 years old, after a quarrel and fight with a visiting friend's son, Felix's father suggested he take up boxing if he wanted to fight. Felix fell in love with boxing from his first training session at the local gym. By 16, Felix won the Pan American Junior Championships, followed by his country's championship a year later. In February 2012, he reached the quarterfinals at the London Olympics, marking the start of his impressive professional career. Verdejo had 29 fights, securing 27 victories. In February 2014, he was credited with the year's best knockout against Sergio Villanueva. A year later, Felix won his first championship belt, the WBO Latino title, which he defended 6 times over 2 years. His skill and talent left no doubt that he was destined for greatness in boxing history. Keishla Rodriguez, born in November 1993 in San Juan, had a similar background. Her full name was Keishla Marlene Rodriguez Ortiz. She grew up in a close-knit family with her parents, Jose and Kayla Rodriguez, her sister, Berlize Nicole, and her half-brother, Jonathan. Keishla was outgoing, excelled in school, and loved animals, aspiring to be a veterinarian. Her sister, Berlize, was her confidant and best friend. Keishla and Felix attended the same school and developed a romantic relationship in their teenage years. When Keishla's parents divorced in February 2011, her mother moved to Florida, but Keishla and her sister remained in San Juan, staying closely connected. At 18, the promising boxer Felix, who had already competed in the Olympics, began dating Elisa Maria Santiago Sierra, a young aspiring model. Despite being in a relationship with Elisa, Felix continued seeing his childhood friend, Keishla. Keishla's sister and mother knew about the affair and disapproved of it, recognizing the complexity of the situation. Elisa believed she was Felix's one true love and future wife, while Keishla, aware of Felix's engagement, found herself unable to break away from him. Felix's relationships were tumultuous, marked by his rising fame and the constant attention from admirers. Despite his serious relationship with Elisa, he could not let go of Keishla. This love triangle filled with deception and emotional turmoil ultimately led to a tragic conclusion. The once promising star of Puerto Rican boxing who seemed destined for greatness ended up in the criminal chronicles, his legacy forever marred by the events that unfolded in 2021. On top of that, he was her first great love. And deep down, the naive girl herself still hoped to be the one. In 2016, the boxer did marry the young Eliza, who at that time was barely 19 years old. Eliza by that time was already quite a famous model, had tens of thousands of followers in social networks, and also opened her own beauty studio for eyelash extensions. In August of the same year, just a few months after the wedding, the athlete got into a serious car accident when he was rushing on his motorcycle. He was taken to the hospital in serious condition with head injuries, bruises, and lacerations. His trainer, Ricky Marquez, seriously feared that his talented charge would go off the rails at the height of his career. But Felix, contrary to the disappointing prognosis, made a rapid recovery and soon returned to the ring. In September 2019, the boxer published in his profile in the social network a picture with Elise, who was in a large term of pregnancy. In the comment to the photo, he wrote, "Soon I will meet my daddy's princess." And a month later, he announced the birth of a daughter who was given the name Miranda Verdejo Santiago. The young man in public looked like a loving husband, caring father, and an exemplary family man. But secretly from his wife, he continued to meet with Kishla, who could not let go. As Eliza later admitted, she guessed that her husband was cheating on her, but every time he tearfully vowed to leave his mistress. Quikla repeatedly tried to break off this painful relationship, but Felix would not let her go. She had no other men because the boxer threatened that if he found out about the fact that Quikla had someone, not good for her and her chosen one. Quikla herself, who had fallen in love with Verdejo since high school, continued to love him despite everything. Rodriguez, as planned, connected her life with the care of animals and got a job at the Center of Veterinary Medicine and Aesthetics. Colleagues described her as conscientious, hardworking, and very responsible. She lived with 2 dogs and a cat, which she simply adored. In 2020, Eliza discovered the correspondence of her husband with several mistresses, including Quikla. The wife gave her husband a scandal and threw him out of the house, threatening that she would file for divorce and forbid him to see his daughter. Eliza's threats had an effect. In addition, in the career of the athlete at that time, there was a serious decline and unnecessary problems where he did not need. For a while, he really stopped seeing Rodriguez, but Felix still did not let her go, trying to control almost every step. Quikla. After a few months of secret visits resumed, and in April 2021, Kishla discovered that she was pregnant. She bought a rapid test at the drugstore, which only confirmed her fears. She first called her sister, who was aware of her complicated relationship with the athlete, and told her everything. It was out of the question to have an abortion because Quikla was already 27 years old, and she was ready to have a child even if she had to raise it on her own. A few days later, Quikla broke the news to the father of her child, hoping in her heart that he would accept it. But Felix was not happy, to put it mildly. He got angry and told his mistress that she should go to the doctor, and if the pregnancy is confirmed, it will be necessary to have an abortion. Naturally, Rodriguez answered him with a firm refusal, but the boxer began to threaten her and insist. Felix said that an illegitimate child will finally destroy his reputation, and this he cannot allow. After Quikla's visit to the hospital, her pregnancy was confirmed, and she now had a certificate to prove it. She called Felix and told him everything, which made him furious. Felix shouted and demanded that Quikla immediately get rid of the child, but she again responded with a categorical refusal. Then the athlete decided to go on the sly, saying that he did not believe her and wanted to personally look at the issued medical certificate. He appointed Kishla a meeting in the evening in a crowded place, which did not surprise her because they always tried not to draw attention to themselves and did not get in front of anyone. A few days before the meeting, the boxer stopped by his old friend Luis Antonio Pediais, who worked in a local machine shop and also had ties with the criminal world, selling illegal drugs. Felix briefly outlined the situation and asked him to help him get rid of his pregnant mistress. Luis had previously been in the field of vision of the police, and the prospect of being in prison scared him. But the athlete was persistent, assured that everything would go smoothly and the police will never come out on them. Besides, Felix promised him an impressive cash reward, and Luis agreed with the support of an accomplice. Felix called Quikla and told her that he wanted to meet her on the evening of April 29th to confirm her pregnancy and decide what to do next. Immediately after talking to her lover, Quikla called her sister back and told her everything. She still had hoped that Felix would accept her child and would not insist on an abortion. But Berenice, all this situation is quite alarmed. She knew that the boyfriend had threatened her sister, and she was worried that he wouldn't do anything to her. Berenice called her mother and shared her concerns, but even together, they could not dissuade Kishla from that fateful meeting. At the appointed time, Rodriguez, taking a doctor's note, arrived at the meeting in her own Kia Forte automobile. Verdejo drove there in his pickup truck, in the back of which Luis was hiding. Quikla immediately got into the athlete's car and showed him the results of the tests. He once again talked about terminating the pregnancy, but Quikla, crying again, responded with a refusal. Against this background, the couple began to quarrel violently, turning to shouting. Then Felix suddenly hit Quicla in the head with his fist, from which she immediately lost consciousness. Until Quicla regained consciousness, Felix took a syringe with a large dose of illegal substances hidden in the glove compartment of the car, which Luis had obtained at his request, and injected Quicla. Then, together with his accomplice, they carried her to the back of the car where there were already prepared pieces of wire and a concrete block. The men tied Rodriguez up, attached the load, and then covered her with a tarp so that no one would accidentally see anything. Felix then returned to the pickup truck while his accomplice got behind the wheel of Quicla's vehicle. Together, they drove to the bridge over the San Jose Lagoon. It was virtually deserted at night, and the men, making sure no one could see them, threw Quicla, still alive, into the water. Afterward, however, they decided to fire a few test shots in pursuit, using the firearms they had brought with them so as not to leave the victim any chance. Having finished the massacre, each of the perpetrators went home. Kishla's co-workers were the first to worry when she didn't show up at the Veterinary Medicine and Aesthetics Center the next day. Kishla has always been very responsible and couldn't just not show up for work without notifying anyone. Since she didn't answer the phone, it was decided to contact her sister to find out what happened. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact her sister, she went to her house. No one answered the door, but Berenice had a spare key, so she got in without difficulty. However, she was met only by hungry animals who had not eaten anything for almost 24 hours. Now Berenice was already in a panic because she realized that something terrible or irreparable had happened to Quicla. She immediately called her mother and told her everything, and then reported to the police about her suspicions and threats to her sister. She also called Felix, but he claimed that he had spent the previous evening and night at home with his family and had not gone to any meeting. The missing girl's mother took the first flight from Florida to San Juan. She thought that her lover might have taken her daughter to a private clinic and paid for her to have an abortion without her consent. Kayla didn't even want to think about the fact that Kishlo was no longer alive. The first thing to do was to question the missing girl's neighbors and co-workers, but they didn't notice anything suspicious and couldn't provide the investigation with any useful information. In parallel, messages about the disappearance of Rodriguez were posted on popular social networks with requests to respond to those who know anything about her fate or current whereabouts. The case quickly received wide publicity, and when it became known that the missing girl was in a long-term relationship with a famous athlete and was expecting a child from him, reporters literally lined up to interview any of Rodriguez's family members. The relatives did not hold anything back and spoke out about their suspicions, among other things, blaming Felix for the incident. On April 30th, Kishla's car was found abandoned on the east side of the city with her documents and personal belongings inside. No signs of struggle were found in the interior, giving a faint hope of finding its owner alive. On May 1st, a passerby strolling on the bridge over the lagoon saw a strange shape resembling a human body in the shallow water. He reported his discovery to the police, who soon recovered from the water the body of a young woman, presumably the same one the whole city had been looking for several days. Members of the Rodriguez family, who arrived to identify the body, hoped to the last that it was not Quicla, but their hopes were not realized. The body had been in the water for several days and changed a lot, but the girl was immediately identified by a remarkable tattoo on her arm. When news of the gruesome discovery hit the press, the residents of the city revolted and began to go out to spontaneous rallies, demanding punishment for those responsible. The same day, Verdejo was detained and taken to the police station for questioning, but the athlete categorically denied his involvement and claimed that on the night of Kishla's disappearance, he was at home with his family. As there was nothing to charge him, Felix was released on his own recognizance. One of the key witnesses was the athlete's legal wife, who at the first interrogation admitted that she was aware of his affair with Kishla, but that she had heard about her rival's pregnancy for the first time. On top of that, she did not confirm her husband's alibi, saying that he was not at home on the night of the murder. The first thing investigators did was check traffic surveillance footage on the way to the bridge from which Quicla was thrown. That's how they found Felix's pickup truck and the victim's car traveling behind each other. But the Kia Forte was clearly not driven by its owner. On the same day, the boxer's car was seized for examination, and in its body, they found some hair of the deceased. Luis was the first to surrender to the police, promising to tell the whole truth in exchange for a reduced sentence. Felix was also taken into custody, but he refused to cooperate with the investigation, did not answer questions, and continued to deny his guilt despite the presence of irrefutable evidence. A firearm was seized from Felix, which he used to shoot the victim from the bridge and for which he had an official permit. Also, a cell phone check confirmed the fact that Felix, Luis, and Quicla were in the same location on that fateful night. Quicla's final farewell was on May 8th, and the funeral ceremony was all over the national news. It was a kind of action calling for the perpetrators of the tragedy to be punished to the full extent of the law, as well as an action to draw public attention to the problem of gender violence. The coffin with Rodriguez's body was brought to the cemetery, not in a traditional hearse, but in a white carriage over which white flower petals were thrown from the air. Many famous Puerto Rican natives, including show business stars, athletes, politicians, and public figures, have spoken out about the high-profile incident. Verdejo was charged with carjacking, kidnapping, premeditated murder, and the murder of an unborn child. All of these crimes together carried the death penalty, but the relatives of the deceased from the very beginning asked the court to elect a sentence of life imprisonment for the killer so that he would suffer in captivity for the rest of his life. The hearing was repeatedly postponed due to the worldwide coronavirus pandemic. But in the spring of 2021, the trial was held in virtual mode. The court found that the crime was committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy and with particular cruelty against a pregnant woman. It was possible to reconstruct the chain of events of that night and the details of the crime, mainly thanks to the testimony of Luis, who did not deny his guilt. He admitted that it was he who, at the request of a friend, got the drug for injection and also brought a wire and a concrete block to get rid of the body. But Felix continued to insist on his non-involvement in the case, although his words could not seriously affect the situation. By the way, the wife of the boxer, who acted in court as a witness, almost immediately after the arrest of her husband filed for divorce and tried to abstract from what was happening, focusing on the development of his business and raising a young daughter. According to some reports, not so long ago, Elisa Santiago remarried. Elisa herself admitted in an interview that she repeatedly received anonymous calls and messages with death threats, as well as death wishes to her and even Miranda. Many considered it was the spouse of the athlete as the organizer of the crime, but no evidence was found. In the summer of 2023, it became known that the jury, having familiarized itself with all the evidence and heard the testimony of all the witnesses, was finally ready to announce the final verdict. Felix Verdejo and his accomplice Luis Cadiz were found guilty on each of the charges against them. But despite this, the killers have not yet been sentenced. The next court hearing is scheduled for mid-November 2023. Most likely, both men involved in the deaths of Keishla Rodriguez and her unborn child will likely go to prison for life with no right to ever leave prison. Imagine that today we will visit a Hollywood movie studio where they shoot the best movies in the world of different genres. But instead of a movie pavilion, we will find ourselves in Wilbur, Nebraska, and our movie for today is a bloody thriller. Nebraska is the territory of the Great Plains. It is located in Tornado Alley. In spring and summer, there are often severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Nebraska is the only tri-state that is landlocked, which means to get from Nebraska to the ocean, bay, you have to cross 3 states. Passing motorists don't like to stop on a dark country road, but a flat tire forced Michael to make a stop on a remote dark highway. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. As he walked around the car, his attention was drawn to a large black bag, the kind used for throwing out garbage, but the bag had an unusual shape. Michael returned to the car, took a flashlight from the glove compartment, and illuminated the bag. It was torn open. There was a stain on the ground around it. Something had leaked out of it, and something light-colored was flickering out of the holes. Moving closer, the man froze at what he saw. A human hand was sticking out of the bag. A call to the emergency services raised the whole town. A few minutes later, investigators arrived on the country highway and thoroughly inspected the area. They confirmed that the package they found. Searchers continued to comb the surrounding area. The recovered remains were soon identified. The The victim was 24-year-old Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents George and Susie Loof. Sydney's family moved to Nile in February, at which time she was in 2nd grade. Her mother Susie was a special education teacher, and her father George was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child. The girl had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father always took her to. During her school years, Cindy played favorite hobbies and put a cross on her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Loofs were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln because of work, they all made sure to keep in touch almost every day and often met for dinner. Even though Sydney lived separately, she often returned home to her parents' house. But lately, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Sydney told how her inner state was getting back to normal, her voice sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make some changes in her life and was looking for a new job. For a young woman, working in a store was not the limit of her dreams. She did not know what she wanted to become or what to do with her career, and these worries led to a rather depressive state. In November 2017, her mental state deteriorated to the point where she started taking antidepressants and sometimes allowed herself to smoke pot. Her family and friends were supportive in every way possible, but she wanted not only companionship, but also love. Being young and modern, Sydney had an interest in the female gender, so she would sometimes look for other girls on social media for dating purposes. To find a friend, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people around the world to find, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, she found a girl named Audrey, and the girl replied to her. They began to correspond. The girls found many common interests such as gambling, hiking, and delicious food. Already after 100 messages, they decided to meet. On November 14th, Sydney headed over to Audrey's house to Wilbur. Their first meeting went so well that Sydney was very happy. They liked each other and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and went home. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before going out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." After the photo, she got a message to go out with Audrey waiting for her in the car. The girls drove off. The next day, Sydney Loof didn't show up for work. But even though she had been in high spirits for the past few days because of her new acquaintance, her family was concerned when co-workers informed them that she didn't show up for work because it was nothing like their responsible Sydney. Susie spoke of her daughter suffering from anxiety and deep depression. Just days before her disappearance, Loof had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Loof's family saw Sydney. The girl's parents went to her apartment and were extremely surprised that Sydney had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike a caring landlady. The parents knew how much Sydney loved her cat and never left her alone for long. They were concerned and reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment itself was locked. When the police did a welfare check of Sydney's home, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the family was adamant. Something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, the 5'7" blonde was reported missing after she failed to show up at the showroom of the Menards store, where she worked at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney suffered from a spinal condition and walked in a different way that would make her stand out from the crowd. She was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. When testifying about the prior events before she went missing, her parents told police that she told her friend on Snapchat Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online Tuesday night and planned to meet up with her again Wednesday night. Sydney's car, which she left in Northeast Lincoln, was found. Police officers said they had conducted interviews and were looking for any leads that could lead to Sydney or her trail. Loof's family distributed flyers saying she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln where the latest information indicated her cell phone was communicating with a tower. The flyer also noted that there was no activity in her bank account and that her cell phone was turned off the night she disappeared. The flyers gave a description of the young woman and distinguishing features such as several tattoos. One on her arm with the words, "Everything will be great someday," a yin-yang sign under her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone with information on Sydney Loof's whereabouts has been asked to contact police by phone. A huge appeal to find Sydney was launched, which included highway billboards with the girl's picture, and a manhunt was also launched on the TV news. Susie persisted in claiming that something had happened to Sydney after the date her daughter had gone on. To prove her point, she took a screenshot of a post that Sydney posted on Snapchat with her picture and the caption, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman she met through Tinder named Audrey. During the search, police reviewed Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from the store where she worked and quickly identified the person they wanted to talk to. The last time Sydney's phone rang a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, probably not far from Audrey's home, but police had no idea who she was. Authorities began searching for a woman named Audrey, the last person to see Sydney alive. But no one knew how to find her because no one knew who she was or if she had a real name. To the police's rescue came Sydney's friend, Brooklyn, who decided to find Audrey herself through Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Audrey, and exchanged phone numbers with her. That's how police learned Audrey's real name. She turned out to be 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. It turned out that Bailey's apartment is within reach of the very cell tower where Sydney's phone was last seen connected to the tower. It also became known that this apartment Bailey shared with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. So who are Bailey and Aubrey? Bailey Boswell grew up in Lyons, Iowa. She grew up in a wholesome, normal family, was a friendly kid, and did well in school. Bailey had success in basketball and was an excellent runner. However, after losing her father, her life changed direction. And after graduating from high school, Bailey went down the wrong path. Bad company, alcohol, and illicit drugs came into her life. On one of the dating websites, she met Aubrey after looking for a daddy status. Aubrey Trail had a depressing past. He had multiple fraud charges, fraudulent check fraud, and theft. Aubrey created his own cult where he called himself the Vampire Daddy. He paid women $200 a week to follow his rules. The rules were strange enough, but there were women who believed Aubrey. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were ordered by the court to pay over $400 for fraud. They also had numerous misdemeanors on the two of them, but the couple managed to go on the run. On November 19, 2017, after obtaining a warrant, police searched Bailey and Aubrey's home. An inspection of the apartment revealed that some of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which was confirmed by a neighbor who had noticed the acrid smell of chlorinated substances 2 days earlier. Police actively began searching for the suspects. While on the run, they posted videos on Facebook saying they had no involvement in Sydney's disappearance and hoped for her safe return. Bailey claimed she went on 2 dates with Sydney, but dropped her off at a friend's house and never heard from her again. She said, "I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl." It took police a few days to track down the couple, but they eventually found them at a hotel in Branson, Missouri. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were taken into custody. A few weeks after Sydney was reported missing, after carefully analyzing phone records and Bailey's location records, police discovered Sydney's remains. She had been dismembered. Her body had been cut into 14 pieces, and police found 13 of her body parts in black plastic garbage bags in ditches in Clay County. Some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. This is just horrific. A total of 16 crime scenes were found with Sydney's remains or personal belongings. Her car keys, driver's license, phone case were found along the highway. All the routes matched the movements of the two perpetrators. Forensics conducted autopsies on 13 body parts that were found. There were abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, abrasions and contusions on her back. There were wounds on her body indicating that Sydney had fought for her life. The heartbreaking discovery shocked not only Sydney Loof's family and friends, but all of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Loof family held a private funeral for Sydney at the Lutheran church the girl attended during her lifetime. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey also pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but pleaded guilty to improper disposal of human remains. Each successive deposition of Aubrey differed from the previous one. The man was constantly confused, changing the course of action and adding different actors. When Aubrey first talked to the police after his arrest, he told them about the cult he and Bailey were involved in. He talked about witchcraft and told them that he was a vampire who could fly. Aubrey portrayed himself as the leader of this cult and a vampire and assured them that he had witches in the cult who had to kill another woman to get powers. So at one of his first court hearings, he admitted that he killed Sydney Loof, but did it completely by accident. He said that he paid her $5,000 to fulfill his intimate fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed, but died accidentally during the intimate act when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted that he disposed of the body by cutting her into pieces as it was a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He had to drain all the blood to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place and lay out her body parts to help her reincarnate faster. But this version turned out to be false. Surveillance footage provided, dated November 14th, shows Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lives. And then on November 15th, they visit a home improvement store, which shows them buying a gruesome array of tools: a hacksaw, chlorine bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used for Sydney's remains. On November 15th at 12:01 in the afternoon, a surveillance camera captured Sydney crossing paths with Aubrey at the Menards store during business hours. But the girl had no idea at the time who he was or how cruelly fate would play her. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing was held for the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof's remains. Separate trials were ordered, but the charge was essentially the same for both. The trials were held in Lexington because attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not get a fair trial in Wilbur because of the publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution argued that Sydney was murdered. She was strangled, and the crime was a premeditated attack that was carefully planned. Aubrey and Bailey were declared ringleaders of a group that was interested in recruiting young women for intimate games. Bailey therefore used Tinder to find the women. At trial, the jury heard testimony from 3 other women who said they had been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey at different times, and their acquaintance also began on Tinder. All of them had been involved with Bailey and had participated in intimate acts with Bailey and Aubrey. One woman said she even traveled with them after they met. She said Aubrey gave her a weekly allowance of $200 and invited her to join his cult. He called the cult members witches and said she had to torture and kill someone to join them. She testified that Bailey was called a witch queen. Another woman testified that Bailey talked in great detail about breaking her fingers and her desire to dismember the body. She'd like to talk about torture. All 3 women who testified made it clear that both Bailey and Aubrey were involved in all the talk about torture and the crime. It is quite strange that in our modern world, there are still people who believe in the horrors of exorcism and try to assure the rest of us that they do. Talking about the investigation and the evidence obtained, the prosecution reconstructed the picture of what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney was getting ready for a date with a woman she had known for a couple days. They texted on Tinder, and Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment. They went for a ride in Bailey's car. After a while, the car stopped at Bailey's house where Sydney was lured into the apartment. There, Bailey and Aubrey pounced on her as soon as she went inside and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. The apartment was then thoroughly cleaned out by Bailey and Aubrey, a part the prosecution alleged was also pre-planned. They then cut Sydney into pieces and dumped her remains in Clay County the next day, November 16th. The court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that on November 16th, as soon as she drove into the garage, she smelled chlorine and the odor intensified when she entered the house. According to the medical examiner's testimony, Sydney's death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Toxicology reports indicated that Sydney had antidepressants in her system. The court learned that in addition to the missing organs, the part of Sydney's body that was not found was her upper left arm, the part just above the elbow and below the shoulder. Prosecutors had demanded the death penalty for both criminals, and the case would be retried if the sentence was unjust. But Aubrey, once again, denied involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying the remains. At one point during Aubrey's trial, he shouted that Bailey had nothing to do with Sydney's death. "Bailey is innocent. Damn you all." He then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade. He survived and was remanded into custody until he made a full recovery. After that, he did not attend court for several weeks. The next time he entered the courtroom was during the defense phase and only when he was scheduled to testify. When he was brought into court, he smirked and told the judge, "I'll be good." It is unusual for a defendant to testify at his own trial. Usually, defense attorneys advise the defendant not to testify because it may cause more problems for him on cross-examination. Some reveal too much. Some can't answer questions straightforwardly, and some are hostile to attorneys asking questions, which creates a bad impression for jurors. But this was not unusual in Aubrey's case, as he had many interactions with police after his arrest. He had given the police his version of events, and at trial he wanted to change his story. Therefore, the court needed to hear his new version of events. He decided to skip the rest of the trial and only returned for the last hearing with his horrible scars clearly visible when he testified in his defense. Aubrey Trail took the stand and shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to authorities and his own legal team about the death of Sydney Loof. In a new version of the testimony he gave, he admitted that they met with Sydney in March 2017, and he paid her to participate in his illegal activities because she needed the money. He said they did not keep in touch. But in November 2017, Bailey wanted to rekindle their relationship, and she contacted Sydney again. Sydney needed money, and Aubrey said that's why he was in Menards that day, November 15th. He offered her $5,000 to be part of his antique gang. The 3 of them ended up engaging in an intimate act later that night, and Sydney accidentally choked to death because of the extension cord they used in their games. "I don't know if Sydney had a seizure or something, but that's when she stopped breathing," said Aubrey. He told the court that there was no ritual involved in cutting up Sydney's body, and all the talk of witches, vampires, and blood-sucking was simply not true. He confessed that he only dismembered her because he couldn't put her body in the car. He said he panicked and dumped her body in the Clay County field as soon as dawn broke on the morning of November 16th. When asked why he didn't seek help if her death was accidental, he said no one would believe him. Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sydney's body, but claimed her death was accidental when they used an extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she admitted to nothing. In fact, her attorneys argued that she was also victimized by Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman. At the time, she was living alone, working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense argued that Bailey had nothing to do with either Sydney's death or the disposition of her remains, but that again proved to be false. The cell detailed analysis of her phone and location records that the police were able to find all of Sydney's remains. The court also learned that it was Bailey who contacted Sydney and arranged to meet her. She was the one who drove to Sydney's duplex to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution told the court that Bailey derived satisfaction from discussing acts of cruelty, and she enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence was presented at trial proving a planned crime. On the day Sydney was killed, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sydney a text message asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage show that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent that text message on Tinder. And although Sydney worked at Menards, it appears she was unaware that Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, alerting her that she was at her apartment and ready to pick her up soon. Phone records indicate that instead of going on a date, as Sydney believed, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that as to Bailey, the evidence showed that Bailey was guilty of purchasing bleach and garbage bags to use to dispose of Sydney's body, and as such, she could be charged with aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. The Loof family had been seeking justice for 3 years, mourning and longing for their Sydney, and they awaited a judgment that gave them comfort. On July 11, 2019, it took a jury less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. The 3-judge panel called his crime cold and calculated. In a second phase of the trial to determine whether he should be executed, county prosecutors kept their promise and secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail. Thus, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was executed by lethal injection. Erin Davis went missing from her home in Nicholson, Mississippi on June 22, 2002. Before her disappearance, her sister-in-law had dropped Erin off at her home. However, she returned the next day. Erin was nowhere to be found. All that her sister-in-law found was Erin's 2 small children, aged 2 and 4, and Erin's purse. At the time of her disappearance, she was also said to be 7 months pregnant. No traces of Erin were ever found when investigators started searching for her in February 2002. In February 2019, the Harrison County Sheriff's Department would receive some additional information prompting them to obtain a cadaver dog to search an area near West Hobachita Creek on Henley Field McNeil Road. The cadaver dog would alert to the presence of remains in 2 different locations, 75 feet apart. They would then request the assistance of Southern Mississippi's Anthropology Department. With the help of 8 graduate students, they would use rakes and shovels to remove small amounts of dirt and also test for variances in the soil. However, they were not optimistic because this area is very well known for flooding 5 to 6 times per year. By the end of the additional investigation, no remains were found. The case still remains a mystery to this day. 17-year-old Angela Freeman was last seen around 1 a.m. at a local Pizza Hut in Petal, Mississippi on September 10, 1993. The next day, her car was found abandoned at the Old Monet Bridge in Perry County, Mississippi. Angela's keys and purse were missing. It is rumored that Angela was 4 to 5 months pregnant at the time. In addition, her on-again, off-again boyfriend was reported to be acting very strangely on the morning of her disappearance. The first crucial hours after her disappearance were wasted by the rural sheriff department that was untrained in proper investigation and were sure that Angela was just a runaway. One example of an adequate investigation is the fact that investigators actually had Angela's mother drive the car to her home instead of the car being sent for further investigation. In addition, the sheriff at the time refused to use cadaver dogs or drag the river. A puddle of fluid seen near the car was brushed off by police as being transmission fluid from a log truck. It wasn't until 4 days later that cadaver dogs were brought in and the area near her car and the nearby water was searched. The cadaver dogs went straight to the spot of fluid found near the car, which was later determined to be her blood. That same day, the dogs found a napkin with traces of Angela's DNA and makeup smeared, as if she had been crying and wiped her face. The napkin was found in the woods nearby. The dogs also found both her shoes nearby. It was later discovered that the car actually contained drops of Angela's blood inside and outside. The police had not dusted the car for fingerprints or looked for blood before having her mother take the car away. Angela's friends reported that on several occasions Angela and her friends had hung out under the Monon Bridge, and it was said that Angela was always creeped out by the area and ready to leave before anyone else. This case, nearly 30 years later, has continued to be unsolved and Angela's body has never been found. On February 4, 1986, 17-year-old high school student Shandra May's disappearance shook the small community of Pea Ridge, Mississippi. Shandra attended Leak Academy and was just a few months short of graduating. She worked part-time at a local McDonald's. On the evening of her disappearance, work was slow. It was cold, rainy, and damp, causing people to stay home and not venture out. As a result, by 7:24 p.m., Shandra had clocked out due to the slow customer traffic. Eager to get in the hours, she stayed around the restaurant hoping that business would pick up and she could clock back in. At 7:40 p.m., she gave up and decided to leave. Before leaving, she used the restaurant phone and called her mother to let her know she was on her way home. Shandra's mother became worried when enough time had passed for her to make the trip home from Forest. Soon after, she opened the door of her home and was faced with a disheartening sight. Her daughter's car was parked on the road less than 100 yards from the house. A check of the car revealed no signs of Shandra. Her purse and belongings remained inside, but her driver's license was missing. Relatives moved the car from the spot to the house, contaminating foot traffic. Found inside the car was a receipt for a Valentine's card that was purchased from a local TG&Y store. Witnesses also reported seeing her purchasing the oversized Valentine's card that evening. It is speculated that the card was bought for her boyfriend at the time, a 19-year-old from Edinburgh, Mississippi. Local law enforcement was involved in the search and, eventually, state and FBI investigators were brought in. One big issue with the investigation is the site where the car was parked was never treated as a crime scene and therefore lots of evidence was most likely missed. 3 weeks later, on the morning of February 26th near the town of Bolton, Mississippi, an off-duty fireman came across something floating in the waters of Baker Creek. Authorities removed black plastic garbage bags. Inside were the battered remains of Shandra, 80 miles from her home and in an area where the remains of others had also been found over the years. The medical examiner found that she had been bound and gagged with packing tape and hit in the head with a heavy object. The cause of death was strangulation. The examiner estimated that Shandra had lived for as much as 17 to 19 days and that her body had possibly only been in the water for 3 to 5 days after her death. There was also some speculation that her body may have been refrigerated for some period of time, which would mean that the time she was alive may have been even shorter than originally projected. Many leads on her death followed, and each only led to a dead end. After all these years, the identity of Shandra's vicious killer remains a mystery. On August 21, 1989, 17-year-old Norman Ladner left his family's country store to go hunting on their 122-acre farm. Norman was an experienced outdoorsman and often spent his spare time exploring his family's land. Norman always returned to the family store between 7 and 7:30 p.m. without fail. When he didn't return later this particular night, his parents began searching their property along with a few friends. Everyone thought he had gotten lost or maybe injured. No one expected what they would find in those woods on that fateful night. Norman's father stumbled upon his son's body laying beneath a tree with a gunshot wound in his temple. Initially, authorities speculated the death was a horrible accident. Perhaps the teenager had jumped down from the tree and fell, making his rifle go off. The family was then shocked when the coroner labeled his death a suicide. Nothing about it made sense. If it were a suicide, why was there a large gash on the top of his head? The sheriff refused to discuss any scenarios besides suicide with the boy's parents. The police never processed the scene as a crime scene. They didn't find a bullet. They didn't look for a bullet. The father would later find one on his own. Norman's gun was never tested or fingerprinted. The teen's wallet with $140 cash was missing. The parents repeatedly tried to get the sheriff to reopen the case, but he flat out refused. His father, desperate for answers, went out into the woods to begin his own investigation. There in the dirt, under where his son's head would have been, he found an investigation. There in the dirt, under where his son's head would have been, he found a bullet with human blood and hair. It seemed to the father that his son was slumped on the ground, rolled to the side, and someone standing above him shot the teen through the temple. The bullet then traveled through the hair and skull and buried into the dirt. Still desperate for answers, the boy's father took the bullet to the sheriff and was quickly dismissed. The police claimed since they didn't find the bullet, then they couldn't prove it was the one that killed Norman. Norman Sr. took the bullet to the state's ballistic lab. He explained how the bullet was too long to fit into his son's gun and asked the examiner to look over the bullet. The results came back inconclusive, citing the same lines as the sheriff almost verbatim. To make matters worse, when the bullet was returned to the family, it was a different bullet than the bullet they had sent in. One day, Norman's mother was approached by a stranger asking if he could discuss her son's case with her. When the pair were out of earshot of her husband, the stranger turned and uttered a chilling threat to her. He told her she should just drop the investigation because they would never find Norman's killer. Frightened, she hurried back to her husband and told him about the incident. The man was gone before anyone could find him. One day, the teen's father was once again looking for clues in the woods. 300 yards from where his son was found, he saw a strange object hanging in a tree. It was a homemade radio device of sorts, covered in tape and wires with a small antenna protruding from the top. It was then taken to a retired DEA agent who knew immediately that this was a device used by drug traffickers to transmit signals. The narcotics planes would fly over an area, and when the signal was picked up on their devices, they would drop their load of drugs. Was this the answer the family had been looking for? Did the teen stumble upon a drug trafficker? To make matters worse, a sheriff would later be charged with dogfighting and other illegal activities. Although some believe he had ties to the local group of Dixie Mafia drug cartels, nothing has been proven. Mary Jacqueline Levitz was last seen on November 18, 1995 by a neighbor as she entered her Vicksburg, Mississippi home shortly after 4 p.m. on November 18th. She was seen earlier the same day by a store clerk at a business in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where she was buying wallpaper for her new home. 2 days later, on November 20th, her disappearance was discovered when a relative went to her home to find out why she hadn't been answering the phone. Jacqueline's front door was found open. Her bedroom carpet and king-size mattress were soaked in blood. Someone had turned the mattress over to conceal the stains. Signs of a fierce struggle, including torn-off fingernails, were scattered on the floor. Although the local sheriff says 2 purses and a tote bag were taken from the house, the perpetrators left behind 2 fur coats valued at $200,000 and a $3,000 pair of earrings, and her cream-colored Jaguar was parked in the driveway. Jacqueline's last marriage was to Ralph Levitz, co-founder of the Levitz furniture empire. Ralph died in March 1995, and Jacqueline inherited his estate worth an estimated $15 million. She had resided in Palm Beach, Florida, but moved to Vicksburg just a few weeks before she disappeared to be nearer to her family. Jacqueline's house in Vicksburg was undergoing extensive remodeling in November 1995, but she was still living in it. There was almost no furniture in the house, only her mattress, some plastic lawn chairs, and a refrigerator. One theory is that whoever abducted Levitz was already in the house when she returned home from a building supply store that Saturday afternoon with wallpaper samples. Because work was being done on the attic, an intruder would not even need to break in. Jacqueline's loved ones and the police believe she met with foul play. Her lawyer speculates that she was the victim of a botched kidnapping, probably at the hands of someone from outside the Vicksburg area. Police believe her body may have been disposed of in the Mississippi River, which runs near Jacqueline Tom. She was declared dead in February, but her presumed murder for murderers remain unconfirmed. 15-year-old Eva Debrul would get up on the morning of June 29, 1977 and go outside and mow her parents' lawn at their home in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. She would then come back inside and make some iced tea. She would receive a phone call requesting her father to go into work, so she informed him and he left just after 11 a.m. Eva's mother worked the night shift and was sound asleep around this time. When she woke around noon, she would find the television on in the house, a pot of iced tea and a glass, and Eva's rubber flip-flops on the front lawn. But Eva was nowhere to be found. Eva has never been heard from again. None of Eva's clothing or belongings were missing except for her eyeglasses. Between the hours of 11 a.m. and noon, Eva's grandmother, who lived nearby, saw a late model blue and white or green and white Jeep-style vehicle drive up to the Debrul residence and stop by the front door. A man would get out of the vehicle and make his way to the front porch, where he appeared to be talking to someone through the screen door. The grandmother assumed the man had come to talk to Eva's father about fixing the car. But Eva's father had already left to go to work. She would see the vehicle again about 10 to 15 minutes later. However, Eva's grandmother didn't notice if he stopped again, and never heard any suspicious noises and never saw Eva get inside the man's vehicle. The man has never been identified, and it is unknown if he had any connection to Eva's disappearance. He is described as Caucasian with a medium height and build and was seen wearing a light green shirt and dark green pants. Eva's family says she was always well behaved, had no boyfriends, and always kept her mother informed of her whereabouts, which means Eva most likely didn't leave on her own, and foul play is suspected in her case. Eva's father, so stressed about her disappearance, would quit his job to spend his days searching for her. Eva's name would come into the public attention when suspected serial killer Henry Lee Lucas would confess to killing her. The only problem is Henry Lee Lucas confessed to killing close to 600 people, and many of those crimes he confessed to he didn't even commit. So while Henry Lee Lucas claimed to have killed Eva, it is hard to say whether he was being honest or not. He was originally sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted in 1999 to life in prison. He would die in prison of heart failure at the age of 64 on March 12, 2001. Sadly, it is not known if he actually killed Eva. As of today, Henry Lee Lucas has never been charged with her disappearance, and Eva has never been found, and the case remains unsolved. Tahir Rada was the pride and joy of Shemuel and Ilana Rada, inhabitants of the peaceful Catherine, a short distance from Haifa in Israel. She grew up with her older siblings, Roy and Ohad, who were always watchful and caring towards her. Tahir's vivacious spirit, love for the arts, and talent in dance made her stand out. Her friends fondly referred to her as their guiding star. Naturally, Tahir's charisma meant she led and others were inclined to follow. Though her beauty and wit sometimes brewed jealousy among other young girls, any rifts were generally short-lived since many of these girls had been friends from childhood. Tahir's daily life included attending a local high school, and like many kids in her neighborhood, she preferred walking to school. It was her routine to call her mother upon reaching home, a reassuring habit for the family. However, on the fateful day of December 6, 2006, things took a turn. Skipping her last class to mingle with her friends, Tahir was her usual self, blending in and enjoying the camaraderie. Around 1:20 p.m., she got really thirsty, so she went to the school building to get a drink. Some younger students recall seeing her on the floor where the 10th grade classrooms were located. However, at night, when the usual call didn't come that evening, her mother grew anxious. Initially dismissing it as a simple delay or a visit to a friend's house, worry soon set in when Tahir was nowhere to be found. Her family tried calling her many times on her phone, but she didn't pick up. This made them worry and feel very sad. Delana's motherly instincts screamed that something was wrong. Without a second thought, she mobilized a search party made up of relatives, friends, acquaintances, and even strangers, all rallying to find Tahir. Shemuel, in sheer desperation, joined the search, navigating through the cold, dark streets. The level of distress and panic among Tahir's family was palpable. Nobody had seen her since she went into the school earlier. So, the police were quickly sent to the school to start looking for her. At around 7 p.m., a group mainly comprising the Rada family's close circle ventured into the school. They searched through the dark hallways and rooms until they got to the girls' restroom for 10th graders. There, they found something unsettling. One of the restroom stalls had its door locked. They saw feet inside, but when they called out, there was a spooky silence and nobody responded. They used a nearby stall to help them look over, and what they saw was beyond belief. Tahir was lying there, not alive, and it was clear that something terrible had happened to her. The walls and floor showed signs of something really scary. She had injuries that were proof of a violent attack, and it was clear that her last moments were filled with fear. The shocking discovery deeply shocked the whole community. Shimon, who was in a lot of pain, couldn't get close to the crime scene because of how horrifying it was. Tahir's brother was so upset that he had to be held back. Everyone in the community was really upset and angry. They couldn't understand how something so terrible could happen in a place where children were supposed to be safe. Parents were worried about their kids' safety and talked about whether it was safe to send them back to school. For a while, the school became a place where a crime had happened and all the normal classes and activities had to stop. People were confused because the police were searching in a wider area instead of concentrating on the school, which is what the locals thought they would do. The police were talking to people to find out where Tahir had last been. 2 people who knew her said they saw her go up the school stairs by herself without anyone following her. Many students reported being in the restroom around the same time frame as Tahir, with several pointing out peculiar occurrences. In the span of 40 minutes, an estimated 10 to 12 girls used the restroom. Yet, the police chose to interview only a handful. What struck investigators as particularly odd was how amidst this constant traffic, no one seemed to have witnessed or heard the violent act that took Tahir's life. Some students noted anomalies, like the presence of an unfamiliar girl with curly hair. One of Tahir's friends, who was confident she knew most of the student body, couldn't recall seeing this girl either before or after that day. Although the mystery girl wore a school shirt, she was perceived as a new student. A specific student claimed to have observed 2 sets of feet in the stall where Tahir was later found. Tahir's recognizable sneakers and another pair of youth-sized all-stars. She, however, dismissed this observation, attributing a foul odor in the restroom as a reason to leave quickly. Another student, after knocking on the stall's door, was informed it was occupied. The police seemed especially interested in discerning the gender of this voice. Even though she repeatedly mentioned it was a female's voice, she felt the officers were unsatisfied with her response. With the whole community offering their help and sympathy, the Rada family was going through a very sad and difficult time, trying to understand that they had lost Tahir. Hames Sadovsky, a private investigator, was really moved by Tahir's case, especially because his own daughter was the same age as Tahir. He got in touch with the Rada family and offered to use his skills to help them. They were thankful and told him everything they could. Ilana mentioned a peculiar observation. When a group of Tahir's friends visited to offer condolences, 2 girls seemed to be having a secretive conversation, prompting Yolanda to think they might be withholding crucial information. Hayam investigated further, finding numerous inconsistencies in their police statements. Interestingly, one of Tahir's classmates went to look for her bag in class but didn't find it strange that Tahir wasn't there. Another classmate mentioned that Tahir seemed unusually distant during her favorite class, theater. When her teacher asked what was wrong, Tahir's response was really unsettling. "Because I fear death." This made a lot of people wonder if Tahir had a feeling that something bad was going to happen to her. When they looked into it more, Tahir's friends shared a really disturbing story. They talked about an 18-year-old from Tiberias named Avi who seemed to be fixated on Tahir. He kept calling and texting her a lot, and he even made a really scary threat. He said he would harm her if she didn't agree to be in a romantic relationship with him. Avi made Tahir even more anxious by insisting on meeting her, and when she said no, he threatened her with harm again. But upon police investigation, there was no evidence to corroborate any interactions between Tahir and this supposed stalker, Avi. This brought up an important question. Why would Tahir's friends come up with such a story? Could it be a way to distract from something else? Hayam Sadovsky, during his investigation, reasoned that the extreme violence inflicted upon Tahir didn't seem characteristic of an adult assailant. An adult wouldn't need to exert such brutality to overpower a young girl. He postulated that the culprits were likely 2 individuals, roughly Tahir's age and stature. Aside from the 2 girls who were previously suspected, there was another person Tahir knew who caught their attention. This girl was similar to Tahir in terms of looks and intelligence, but they had a noticeable dislike for each other. Tahir had told her mom about her concerns regarding this person at the beginning of the school year. What's interesting is that this girl left town not long after Tahir's death, and when the authorities asked her about students leaving town, she avoided giving a straight answer. Despite initial suspicions pointing towards Tahir's classmates, the investigation did not yield any DNA, fingerprints, or shoe imprints as evidence. Authorities then shifted their focus to a gardener employed at the school. His presence in the teacher's lounge on the fateful day, combined with his seemingly disoriented demeanor, as noted by the school psychologist, made him a person of interest. But the school's gardener had a strong alibi that made it hard for the police to connect him to the crime. Even though the psychologist's statement seemed believable, the police were stuck with a lot of uncertainties and not enough answers. Then, in a surprising turn of events, the investigation started looking at someone else who looked very much like the school's gardener. This led investigators to believe that the school psychologist could have mistakenly identified the two. Roman Zadorov, a construction worker at the school, found himself under the investigative lens shortly after Tahir's murder. A recent immigrant from Ukraine, Zadorov had relocated to Israel 2 years prior and was earning a living through miscellaneous construction jobs. He had met his wife, Olga, back in Ukraine, and the two were high school sweethearts. His family made the move to Israel, where he was then employed as a handyman for a contractor. Due to visa restrictions, Zadorov wasn't legally allowed to work, so he was compensated in cash. At his wife's urging, Zadorov had initiated the process of acquiring Israeli citizenship during the time of his arrest. He wasn't fluent in Hebrew and mostly communicated in Russian. The police's suspicion was aroused when Zadorov revealed that he had discarded the clothes he wore on the day of Tahir's murder. During the long hours of his interrogation, while denying any involvement in the crime, investigators scoured his residence. They unearthed pornographic content on his computer, which, upon closer inspection, involved young but legally aged women. Further amplifying suspicion was Zadorov's collection of knives, especially given the nature of Tahir's injuries. Zadorov's detention was based on the circumstantial evidence of the knives and the school psychologist's potentially mistaken testimony. Adding to the tension was the media's reporting of unverified information, claims that Zadorov's DNA matched that found at the crime scene. This, however, was not accurate. While DNA samples were indeed sent to the US for testing, the results were pending. The interrogation tactics took a contentious turn. Authorities missiled Zadorov, stating that his DNA was present at the crime scene in an attempt to extract a confession. Although Zadorov initially resisted, he was pressured into thinking the evidence was undeniable. He speculated that perhaps he inadvertently stepped in blood he had noticed in the school's male restroom, thus explaining any potential trace. After this grueling questioning, he was placed in a holding cell, suggesting further developments in the case were imminent. Something surprising happened. Zadorov's cellmate turned out to be working with the police. They promised him a lot of money and even more if he could get Zadorov to admit to the crime. But Zadorov didn't give in. He kept saying he didn't do it, especially because he had just become a father and didn't want to lose his family. But after more than a week, the informant tried a different approach. He made Zadorov believe that the evidence against him was really strong and his best chance to get a shorter prison sentence would be to admit to a lesser crime like manslaughter. That way, he might spend less time in jail. Under significant pressure and with the informant's guidance, Zadorov was led to believe that he might have acted in a fit of uncontrollable rage, a side effect of feeling marginalized as an immigrant in Israel. Zadorov started doubting his own memory, pondering over past incidents where he acted out and later had no recollection of the event. Eventually, he mused, "Maybe I did kill her. If everything points towards me, perhaps I did it." Yet, inconsistencies remained. Zadorov recalled working late on the day of Tahir's murder and wasn't covered in any blood. His discarded trousers, which had been a point of suspicion, were thrown away due to their uncomfortable fit, not any purported bloodstains. Without Zadorov knowing, his talks in the prison cell were being recorded. Taking advantage of Zadorov's growing uncertainty, the investigators convinced him to act out what happened during the crime of the school, and they recorded everything on video. The authorities thought this was the proof they needed. Later, in a press conference, they said they had caught Tahir's killer and suggested that a small argument over cigarettes had made Zadorov react violently. However, Tahir's family and friends challenged this narrative. They desired more concrete forensic evidence. They felt in their core that Zadorov wasn't the actual perpetrator. Their skepticism was compounded by the police's claim regarding the cigarette altercation. Tahir was known to detest smoking and was unlikely to insult anyone, especially someone older than her. Tahir's mother, Leah Rada, was persistent in her belief that the real killer came from Tahir's circle of friends. Over the years, she gathered information, growing increasingly convinced that there were unsettling dynamics within Tahir's close group of friends leading up to her tragic death. Alana, while digging deeper into the school's culture, found some disturbing information. She thought that a lot of students might be part of a satanic group, and she started thinking that Tahir's death could have been a part of a ritual. As the investigation continued, Roman Zadorov's wife got in touch with their legal team. After they did their own investigation, they came to the conclusion that Zadorov was being blamed for something he didn't do and had been manipulated into confessing. Zadorov quickly recanted his confession, yet remained incarcerated awaiting his trial, which commenced on July 2, 2007. The prosecution's narrative took a dramatic turn. They suggested that traumatic childhood experiences from Ukraine were triggered when Zadora began working at a school, leading to an explosive reaction when provoked by the students. They also misleadingly stated that DNA evidence tied Zadorov to the crime scene, even though the results from the US had not been received. The defense, however, dismantled the prosecution's claims one by one. Despite the crime scene being dense with various pieces of evidence like blood, hair, and footprints, not a single trace linked Zadorov. His residence was scored extensively, even his washing machine, but yielded no ties to the crime. 3 hairs on Tahir's body matched 3 different individuals, none being Zadorov. 60 fingerprints found at the site didn't match him either. Moreover, Zadorov's timeline for the day provided him with a reliable alibi. His whereabouts were confirmed by various people at different times, ensuring he was nowhere near the crime scene during the estimated time of Tahir's death. The prosecution relied a lot on Zadorov's confession, even though it had many mistakes. When they reenacted the crime, it didn't match up, and it seemed like the police were telling him what to say. They said Zadorov knew things only the real killer would know, but the defense argued that the investigators actually told him all those exclusive details. When Zadorov was asked to show how certain parts of the crime happened, he kept getting it wrong, and the officers had to help him until his answers matched the evidence. Furthermore, the nature of Tahir's injuries suggested they were inflicted by a left-handed individual, while Zadorov was right-handed. The multiple inconsistencies in Zadorov's confession raised significant doubts about its authenticity and the integrity of the investigation. Zadorov's confession had a lot of inconsistencies, and the defense team pointed them out clearly. He said he used a knife with a smooth blade, but the forensic evidence showed that the weapon had a serrated edge. To make things more confusing, during the reenactment of the school, Zadorov took the officers to the wrong restroom. The actual crime scene was easy to spot because there was still crime scene tape there, which was a pretty big mistake. Also, when Zadorov showed how he escaped from the restroom cubicle, it didn't match the evidence at the crime scene. He said he jumped over the cubicle door, but the footprints suggested that the killer climbed over the neighboring cubicle instead. Prosecutors argued that a bloody footprint at the scene matched Zadorov's specific shoe brand. However, this claim lost weight given that no blood was found on his actual shoes. Considering the violent nature of the crime, it seemed improbable that he could be present in the cubicle without his shoes being splattered with blood. Despite these glaring inconsistencies and the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crime, Zadorov was found guilty and handed a life sentence. The court labeled his statements as deceitful, adding charges of obstructing a police after the trial. Tahir's mother initially believed Zadorov was the perpetrator, swayed by his confession and the supposed footprint evidence. Yet, in the ensuing months, her conviction wavered. Shandra Rada soon went public with her distrust in the legal system and voiced suspicions towards students at Tahir school, even suggesting a satanic ritual might be involved. Refusing to accept the verdict, Zadorov's defense team remained undeterred in their pursuit of justice. Further muddying the case's credibility was a scandal involving the presiding judge, who later resigned due to charges of indecent offenses against minors. Public sentiment started to shift towards Zadorov, with many voicing their support for his innocence and demanding justice for Tahir. In 2016, a documentary, Shadow of Truth, spotlighted the case and introduced a harrowing confession from an anonymous individual. He recounted a chilling admission from his ex-girlfriend, referred to as AK, who confessed to Tahir's murder. This former student of the same high school confessed to wearing the school's uniform, lying in wait, and killing Tahir in a ritualistic manner. This confession eerily aligned with earlier police testimonies from a student. X's backstory further darkened this narrative. She had a traumatic childhood, which included witnessing extreme violence and being concealed in a wolf's corpse for warmth. These experiences led her to have disturbing fantasies about violence and blood to the point where she became obsessed with them. After Tahir's murder, Ake supposedly told her lover all the gruesome details of the crime, even showing them her blood-soaked clothes and the murder weapon. She went into great detail about what she did and what happened afterward, and it strangely matched what investigators had already found. Bringing back these unsettling claims and stories only added to the complexity and uncertainty of the case. In the dark aftermath of Tahir's murder, AK stayed close to the lifeless body, hiding until it was safe to leave. She managed to slip away without anyone noticing, changing out of her blood-stained clothes and getting clean ones before making her escape. Once she got home, she cleaned herself up and disappeared from everyone's radar. Roman Zadorov's defense team was eager to probe deeper into the account relayed by AK's ex-boyfriend. They subjected him to 3 lie detector tests, all of which he passed without any signs of deceit. This prompted the police to arrest Aki, a striking blonde woman who vehemently denied any involvement in Tahir's killing. Aki shifted the blame to her former lover, accusing him of both harboring bloody fantasies and physically assaulting her. Things took a really unsettling turn when AK, who was on house arrest, tried to harm her current boyfriend. When he rejected her, an intoxicated AK threatened him with a piece of broken glass. Luckily, people nearby stopped her from carrying out the attack. When the police arrested her, AK suddenly had a scary change of heart and confirmed the horrifying things her ex-boyfriend had told them before. Even though AK was found unfit to go to trial for the attempted murder and was sent to a mental health facility, no formal charges were filed against her. On the other hand, her ex-boyfriend had to deal with charges of obstructing justice and indecent assault while he was in prison. While he was behind bars, the authorities made him a proposition. If he took back what he had said about AK's involvement in Tahir's murder, they would drop his charges. He strongly and dramatically refused, even threatening to take his own life while insisting that AKA was responsible for Tahir's tragic death. The tragic murder of Tahir Rada not only took away a young, promising life but also shattered the lives of those who loved her. The passing of Shemuel Rada, Tahir's father, in January 2016 further added to the family's anguish. During Shemuel's final farewell, Alana Rita's heart-wrenching words, calling Shemuel a king soon to be reunited with his queen, Tahir, underlined the depths of her pain. And, amidst her own overwhelming grief, she expressed her own yearning to join them. Yet, the story continued to unfold. The discovery of new forensic evidence in 2018 threw a wrench into the case's perceived conclusions. The matching DNA of a hair found on Tahir's body to the man who had earlier made revelations about 8K muddied the waters even more. It raised pressing questions. Was he the true perpetrator, or had he been speaking the truth throughout? His proximity to AKA during a murder and the fact that criminals often immerse themselves in investigations added layers of complexity. In 2019, Zadorov's attorney Yuram Halevi filed a request with the Supreme Court for a trial, claiming the existence of a lot of new evidence that proves unequivocally that Zadorov did not murder the deceased and could not have murdered the deceased. In a dramatic ruling and perhaps the most famous murder case in Israeli history, Roman Zadorov was acquitted on March 2023 of the February 2006 murder of a 13-year-old schoolgirl that horrified the nation in a retrial that overturned previous convictions that saw him serve more than a decade behind bars after being sentenced to life. The panel of 3 judges at the Nazareth District Court announced a 2-1 decision to exonerate Zadorov, who burst into tears and later said, "The truth triumphed. I am happy. I was confined to my home. Now I will take my children for a stroll." Judges Asher Kula and Danny Sarfati acquitted Zadorov, while the third judge, Tamir Nissim Shai, ruled that he was guilty. The verdict is some 700 pages long. A representative of the state prosecutors in the case said her team would study the verdict and then decide whether to appeal the acquittal to the Supreme Court. At the end of the verdict reading, Judge Kula turned to Alana Rada, the victim's mother. "We tried to solve the mystery, but it is possible that Tahir took her secret to the grave," he said. Alana Rada answered, "At last, after 16 years of lies, justice was served. The war is just beginning. This is a cover-up by the prosecution. The prosecutors of the state of Israel murdered my daughter," she added, reiterating her past accusations that the poor investigative work and alleged framing of Zadarov had been tantamount to murdering her daughter all over again. While at the moment no one has been charged for Tahir's murder, we hope it will happen in a near future. The case of Leah Souza. On June 7, 1977, the state of Ontario, Canada witnessed the birth of Leah Souza. Leah's life began with her strong and determined mother, Laura Souza, who, despite being the single parent, left no stone unturned in ensuring her daughter's well-being. For a considerable time, their world was just the two of them, journeying through life's highs and lows together. As time unfolded, Laura introduced Leah to her new baby brother, Michael. The identity of their father remains undisclosed to the public. While some believe that a father figure was missing from their lives, the addition of Michael brought a sense of completeness to their family. Living in Cumberland Beach, Ontario, a quaint region about 2 hours away from Toronto, the Souzas had a humble abode with a combined living and kitchen area and a single bedroom. But this didn't deter Leah's spirit. She grew into a radiant young girl with a lively sense of humor and zest for life. Leah's academic achievements and her roles as a doting sister and daughter made her family immensely proud. At the age of 13, the Souza family decided to visit Laura's sister, taking a rejuvenating 6-week summer break. With the Canadian school year commencing the Tuesday after Labor Day, they were soon back in Cumberland Beach, gearing up for the upcoming academic year. As the 1990 Labor Day weekend approached, Leah was eagerly preparing for her impending high school journey. On the night of September 1st, while she rested on the couch, Laura and baby Michael slept peacefully in the bedroom. But that tranquility was shattered when, between 1:30 and 3 a.m., an unknown individual forcibly entered their home. Initially, the intruder brutally attacked Laura, using a metal object to inflict severe head injuries. He then turned his attention to Leah, assaulting her inside the house before dragging her to the backyard for further violence. The following morning, a friend of Leah's grew concerned after failing to reach her by phone. She decided to check on her, cycling over to the Souza residence. The horrific sight she discovered was beyond comprehension. Leah's lifeless body lay in the backyard amidst a scene of devastation. The police were immediately alerted, and upon arrival, they found Laura grievously injured but alive. The silver lining amidst the tragedy was that young Michael remained untouched and unaware of the nightmare that had taken place. Laura was rushed to a Toronto-based hospital, where she spent 3 challenging weeks recuperating under tight security, fearing the perpetrator might return. The extent of her injuries required multiple surgeries, leading to the insertion of metal implants in her skull and cheek. One eye was severely damaged, resulting in lasting issues like impaired vision, dizziness, and diminished hearing. The brutal attack on Leah and her mother, who miraculously survived, profoundly shook both law enforcement and the residents of the rural community. In a place where people once led peaceful lives, leaving doors and windows open and letting children cycle freely without any fear, panic began to permeate the air. Parents became hesitant to let their children play outdoors, preferring to keep them close and in sight. Locking doors, securing windows, and keeping weapons nearby for self-defense became commonplace. In fact, out of sheer fear of a nocturnal assault, many residents started keeping a weapon or tool close to their beds. The palpable fear was evident on the faces of the community members. Investigators tirelessly worked to shed light on the events and identify potential suspects. Even though various samples were collected from the crime scene and inside the home, they couldn't find the assailant's DNA. Neither the weapon used in the crime nor the bloodied clothing the perpetrator wore during the attack was ever found. One key clue emerged: a footprint from a size 9 or 10 Nike tennis shoe made of leather. It was believed that Laura might have seen the attacker, but due to her injuries, she could not recall any events from that night. Investigators theorized that the individual who took Leah's life might have been familiar with the family and their vulnerabilities, noting their secluded living area and the absence of a male figure in the household, a single mother with an infant and a teenage daughter. Furthermore, detectives hypothesized that the attacker knew the region well, possibly being a resident or a frequent visitor, and was aware that the family was alone that particular night. One person of interest identified was Brian Timothy Elson from a nearby town. For months after Leah's tragic end, Brian took the life of 17-year-old Sandra Bannister in a place less than 13 kilometers from where the Souza family lived. While Brian denied any involvement, the police suspect he was in Cumberland Beach on the night of the assault on the Souza household. However, after questioning, he was released. He was never charged for Leah's murder but pleaded guilty to manslaughter in Sandra's case, serving only 6 years in prison. After his release, due to concerns about his potential threat, the courts allowed the police to monitor his movements for 3 years, though this led to no further developments. As the authorities persisted in their investigations, Laura grappled with the gaps in her memory. Eager to recall the events of that fateful night, she tried various methods, including hypnosis and the controversial use of sodium pentothal, commonly known as truth serum. However, these attempts were in vain. Later, she turned to a renowned expert in brain science in Ontario. He attempted to stimulate Laura's damaged right brain hemisphere with magnetic fields to retrieve memories. Sadly, this effort also failed. He explained that human memories don't instantly solidify. Experiences take 20 to 30 minutes to permanently store in our brains. Unfortunately, during Laura's attack, this critical window was lost. He compared it to shutting down a computer without saving, suggesting that the memory might be lost forever, a heartbreaking outcome for Laura. In February 2008, Ontario Provincial Police launched a billboard campaign along the highway near the Souza residence, seeking new leads on Leah's case. This initiative yielded some promising testimonials. That same year, an intriguing tip led to an extensive search for the murder weapon on a wooded property in Cumberland Beach. However, the search came up empty and Leah's case remained unresolved. In 2010, marking the 20th anniversary of the crime, the news program ran a feature on Leah's case. During their investigation, they found out that Brian's grandmother, a person of significant interest in the case due to her association with another similar attack, lived on the same street as the Souza at the time of the incident. Brian was reportedly staying with her during that period. When a reporter located Brian at his home and questioned him about the assault leading to Leah's death, he denied any involvement. He claimed he was at a party in another town that night where 60 witnesses could confirm his alibi. Over the decades since the murder, more than 1,500 people have been interviewed by the police. The quest for answers in Leah's tragic case continues. On one occasion, Laura spoke to the media, expressing her growing concerns that the case might never be solved. However, she maintained hope that one day she would come to know what transpired and why. The grieving mother pleaded with the community not to forget her daughter. Even though she couldn't remember the events of that fateful night, the haunting memories continued to torment her, and she wasn't the only one scared by the tragic events of the summer night in 1990. Officers who investigated Leah's case, along with the journalists who covered it, acknowledged the horror that continued to grip them. By 2020, an investigator of the Ontario Provincial Police, the last in a series of investigators who had been on the case since Labor Day 1990, described the brutality as off the charts. He stated that both mother and daughter, deep in sleep, stood no chance against the attacker as they were ambushed and severely beaten. At that point, he revealed that the police believed a pipe or an iron wrench might have been the weapon used by the assailant. Yet, they held back further investigative details to avoid jeopardizing the case. Regrettably, as the years since Leah's assault and the severe injuries inflicted on her mother Laura passed, the mystery of that night remained unsolved. More than 2 decades after the incident, the police reiterated that there were individuals who had information about the events and could potentially help solve the case. Despite a reward offer of $50,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator, that crucial piece of evidence never materialized. Still, they encouraged anyone who believed they had even the slightest information to come forward. Jim Van Allen, a criminal profiler with the Ontario Provincial Police, had studied around 850 fatal assaults before retiring in 2010. He dedicated significant years of his career trying to understand the motives behind heinous crimes and how to prevent them. When discussing Leah's case, he stated that while all violent deaths are tragic, some, like Leah's, are unforgettable. To Jim, the crime scene, which looked like a dollhouse in a tidy 60 square meter space without a basement, suggested that the attack was personal and intimate. Given that the family had only recently moved in and only locals knew they were home, he surmised that the aggressor was local and likely acted alone. In Jim's analysis, the intruder, equipped with a metal tool to break a window pane, likely had a sinister plan for the night. The level of violence exhibited indicated the act wasn't just a random outburst, but rather a manifestation of deep-seated sadism. Jim hypothesized that the assailant, already predisposed to violence, might have been at a personal breaking point, possibly under the influence and driven by a lifetime of resentments. He pondered if the man had a recent argument or felt particularly humiliated that day, suggesting past humiliations could have acted as a trigger for his rage. The profiler believed that the attacker might have known Laura and been interested in her. However, as a single mother, she would have been out of his league like many other women. Jim's analysis suggested that while the intruder was likely known in the community, he wasn't particularly well liked, leading women to instinctively fear him. From Jim's assessment, while criminals typically flee their localities after committing heinous acts, he felt Leah's assailant might have remained nearby. Perhaps he cleaned his stained clothes and discarded the metallic instrument. The attacker's potential financial constraints and limited resources might have dictated this choice. Though not exceptionally astute, the culprit had the cunning to remain silent. In Jim's professional estimation, this person showed no regret for Leah's untimely death and likely felt indifferent about Laura's fortunate survival. But all these speculations and years of persistent investigation couldn't bring them any closer to the elusive perpetrator. In a twist, in 2014, Mary Rule, an ex-officer of the Ontario Provincial Police with 3 decades of service, unveiled a book named A Viable Suspect: Multiple Murders and the Limits of a Police Force in Canada's Most Noted Unsolved Mystery. Barry's narrative raised suspicions about a serial criminal, dubbed Larry Talbot in his writings, connecting him to Leah's demise and other similar incidents in southwest Ontario. A personal encounter with this man named Larry in 1971 was recounted by Barry, wherein Larry trespassed and assaulted his fiancée. This attack was thwarted by Barry, who noticed the intruder's method of entry. Breaking a rear window resembled the approach at the Souza residence. Larry, known as a traveling salesman in southwest Ontario, had his vehicle inspected, revealing a rape kit. Yet, regardless of Barry's insights into recurring patterns, Larry escaped intense scrutiny and passed away without ever being a legally recognized suspect. Even as Barry's book garnered attention, it didn't decisively resolve the cases hinting at Larry's involvement. Commemorating the 25th year of Leah's tragic end in 2015, Laura echoed sentiments of profound sorrow and exasperation, mourning the stolen potential of Leah's life. Investigators, over the years, left no stone unturned, pursuing leads, deploying multimedia investigations, revisiting evidence, and meticulously studying the comprehensive case files among the most voluminous in police records. With a belief that someone local held the key to unlocking Leah's murder mystery, the police broadcasted a plea for information, spotlighting a $50,000 reward. Leah's mother lamented that even after years, she couldn't recollect the events of that devastating night. The knowledge that clues about the identity of the assailant responsible for Leah's tragic end were locked away in her memory was tormenting. Driving past the house became a somber task for many in the community. Paul Peton spoke about the profound impact this incident had on their lives. Even though he never knew Leah personally, the chilling details of her fate left him and his peers deeply shaken. Parents became overly cautious, restricting their children's outdoor activities. In a time without the rapid information spread of social media, whispers of fear propagated through the community. A new detective took over the case in 2019, and he has been diligently collaborating with experts from similar past cases. The case file, vast and complex, demanded exhaustive scrutiny to uncover any overlooked evidence. Though he didn't divulge specifics on whether they believed a single individual or multiple were involved, he emphasized the continual re-examination of evidence from 1990, thanks to modern forensic methods. Even after over 30, the brutal demise of Leah Souza remains an unresolved mystery. The collective efforts of the community and law enforcement have yet to bring the perpetrator to justice. This harrowing case serves as a grim reminder to the community about the imperativeness of vigilance and unity. Authorities, meanwhile, are unwavering in their quest for justice. Leah's memory remains etched in the community, continually underscoring the importance of justice and safety for all. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.